chapter 4.
All right, yep, chapter 4 in this book, Arrival at the Palace Beautiful. If anyone is looking on any other kind of book, I don't really know where you're going to be, but please remember the context that had led us here. After meeting the interpreter at his house, he starts climbing the hill. He finds the respite partway up. He sleeps when he shouldn't have. He loses his the scroll of his salvation certification, and then he remembers it only later and has to go find it. And there's the people that he meets along the way who were trying to hop the fence. And anyway, he has now made it to this next significant step. Chapter 4 is going to be the Palace Beautiful. I think we're at the point where we're all on the exact same book, so we're not going to get different wording about that. But he arrives to Palace Beautiful, and he is hoping that he might have a place to stay for a bit. Remember that we had just heard before mistrust and nervousness previously, and talked about there were lions. And so there are lions that are close to the path leading to get to this palace where he thinks he can stay. So what happens with the lions?
Yeah. Make him nervous.
He's definitely nervous.
Stay in the middle.
Right. He's given advice now. There's a watchman at the palace who sees him and presumably kind of can tell that he's pausing. Maybe the nervousness of the lions or whatever. And so he's shouting advice. And what's the advice? Don't be afraid and stay in the middle. Stay on the path.
Your strength and courage so small.
There's actually a little bit of a rejoinder there. Is your strength and courage so small that you're gonna turn away now because of these lions? There is an implication in that, I think, that from the book to the evangelist to help to the interpreter to all of the positive, constructive people he's met on the way, every single one of them has told him that there is a trustworthy path that will see him safely through. The problem comes when you stray. And he's now encountered opportunities to see the difference between staying on the path and getting off the path, such as in the swamp. So
they also said there will be problems.
There's going to be problems, but if you stay on the path, you're going to be okay. For him to see the lions and to be, reasonably afraid, because lions will kill you. Here's the difference then between knowing a thing to be true and experiencing it. And that can often cause us problems. There are certain things that you can't really understand until you experience them. There's classic things like childbirth. You can read books. Getting married. You can read books. You can talk to people. You can see it on a movie. Some of these events just aren't the same until you're there. People who are watching the hurricane coverage and seeing the winds and the rain, you can know and imagine the difficulty it must be. But a few hours later, when the eye starts to approach us and your power cuts off and the wind starts to howl, and you feel the rain beat against the house, and you look and you can see the trees swaying almost sideways, it's different.
Yeah.
And perhaps
anyone who hasn't been through a hurricane before, I had no idea what to expect.
right, yeah. All the poor people who this was their initiation. You know, they've recently moved to the area. Well, guess what? So I'm a softie, and so I see myself in Christian's fear, and I want to excuse it or explain it. The watchman is also true. He's correct. And his words really echo the words of Jesus to the disciples in the boat during the storm. We ought to know better, but when we're face to face with the danger or a trial, you know, that is oftentimes very different. I think it's C.S. Lewis again who says something along the lines of fortitude is not just a virtue, but it is the point in which each of the other virtues are tested. Like, you know, trust, until that trust is actually put to the test, you don't really know. And when the trust is tested by your circumstances, like, I don't know if this really will work or not, it takes that fortitude, that courage, that strength to then overcome the very natural impulse or temptation to break trust. To run. So that's kind of where we are. Why is he safe from the lions, by the way, if he stays on the path? They're chained. They're chained. I've got in my mind a Tom and Jerry cartoon with Spike the bulldog, and Tom kind of figures out where Spike is chained to his doghouse, and he draws a line in the sand, and Spike is, but you know, he's like this far away because, you know, Tom can see that he can't pull any further, and so Tom walks off to do something else, and Spike erases the line, and he redraws it like a foot back closer to him, and so when Tom comes back to mock him, and Spike just jumps in. So, you know, if Christian stays on the way, in the path, as narrow as it is, the chain is sufficient to keep the lions away from him. But they're not frozen. These are not statues of lions. They are real lions. And if they have a chain, what happens? I'm not worried so much about breaking, but remember that when you have a chain, it sort of implies there's a range of motion. You know, that somewhere in this radius, if you venture in, they can get you.
And he can estimate that, but he doesn't know for sure how.
Sure. And even being told that there's a chain, I can understand some trepidation. We've all probably seen, you know, on TV, someone in a shark cage and watching a 16-foot great white bump up against, and it seems very safe from where we are. But has any one of us actually jumped in the water with that? I have swum with sharks before, and I have been in the water with, you know, reasonably dangerous sharks. And even though you're pretty confident that nothing's going to happen, it's different. You can feel your heart rate go up, and you begin to second guess. This was overseas where the liability laws were much more lax, and so they let tourists do crazy things. And I start thinking about, wait a second, like this is not America, and all of a sudden, I don't know how safe this really is. So anyway, he is able to make it through the lions. We're not going to press that point too far, although we do know that our adversary prowls around like a roaring lion, seeking someone to devour. So Anyway, the watchman both encourages him and kind of chides him, and Christian finally makes it in. So Christian makes it to the palace. This is a place of rest for pilgrims on the way. But then before Watchman says you can stay the night, what does he do? He questions him, and he has to call to Prudence, Piety, and Charity, who live there, because it's not within his power alone to say whether or not somebody can stay. The residents of the house. And I think that's we can talk about Prudence, Piety, and Charity, which we will in a second, like their qualities. But I think it's kind of an interesting little touch that these three virtues, if you will, they live in the palace. Even that kind of communicates something. They're not fellow pilgrims who are on the way somewhere else. They live there. And then we can speak to that. Why would Prudence, Piety, and Charity live in a way station on the path? And so here we get to the questions that they have for him. So they kind of want to vet him,
Sure.
which in a practical sense, a stranger wants to come crash on your couch, you would likely want to know more than you're knocking on my door. Who are you? Why are you here? Are you an axe murderer? Whatever. So what kind of questions do they ask him?
One word is name.
Okay.
There's name.
Now, interestingly enough, or maybe not, pretty much everybody wants to know where he came from.
Yeah.
Like, I want to say just about every interaction has that where did you come from, and we get the city of destruction where he can mention that. And so, well, why are you not at home? Why are you here instead of there? And what's his response to that?
Said he did a lot and talked a lot about Christ's work, but that he didn't feel comfortable with his past
Okay.
and was looking to be in a better place.
Right. He knows destruction is coming to his city. He knows the burdens of his own sin. He is deeply sorrowful. And then Evangelist has told him that God has a plan. He needs to flee destruction. He needs to follow the path. And he is set on the way to the celestial city. Now, there is a somewhat surprising to me, at least I definitely didn't expect it when we got there. He gives the nutshell summary to Piety of what he's done along the way, and Piety keeps pushing back. Well, is that all you did? You didn't see the interpreter? Oh yeah, I saw the interpreter. It was great. He showed me things I'll always remember. Okay, but what did he show you? And Piety kind of keeps poking at this to get more and more from him. Piety wants to know about each of the various visions. And when he leaves one out from the interpreter's house, Piety wants to ask about that. Well, what about that one? What about the one you didn't bring up? What about, are you sure you didn't see anything else? Well, yeah. Come to think of it, I also saw. So, two things about this I think is maybe worth noting, or for us to kind of think about. Number one, why is it significant for him to recall each of the visions that he had at the interpreter's house and not just sum it up? And number two, why is Piety so insistent that he does explain all of them? Thoughts?
Well, I would say he wants to make sure his heart is in the right place.
The reason for recalling is a learning experience that helps imprint it inwardly.
Yes, okay. Right, that these words of God would be written on our hearts and not just in something in front of us. Did the learning experience actually sink in? Did it make a difference? So remember that in the interpreter's house, each room was a little setting or a little scene. Each one had a point. Some were encouraging, some were frightening, some were about things to do, things not to do, what could happen if you went the wrong way. And so there's a check. Like, remember, you're the guy you've already lost your scroll once. So let's make sure you learned your lessons. Let's go over them, point by point. When I first was learning algebra, I was clever enough to often solve very simple equations by looking at them, thinking, guessing, putting obvious pieces together. And so for quite some time, I didn't practice all of the steps where when you have a simple algebraic equation, you want to, now you need to subtract from both sides. And now you need to divide from both sides. And now you need to move this over, like show every step along the way. And when they're real simple, you don't really have to do that. If we say 2x equals 4, you can pretty much guess that it's 2. You don't have to divide both sides by 2 and then drop down and then write x. We can sort of figure that out. The problem is, if you don't show your steps, you may skip over something you don't really understand. You may make a mistake along the way that you can't backtrack and fix. You may fool yourself into thinking you understand the process better than you do. Just because I can look at a simple equation and I can guess and get the right answer, when that equation becomes more complicated, when it becomes more than I can keep in my head, when it starts having steps that don't resolve easily or cleanly, there's all the more reason to have gotten into the habit of showing every step along the way. You can catch yourself in making a mistake. You can double check that you've done the right thing. If you do get a wrong answer, you can work backwards and find out where you went wrong. And then you can also just sort of affirm that you understand the process as a whole. So I think there's a little bit of this that I feel a little pedantic, frankly. Did you see anything else? Did you see anything else? Yeah. Show your work is oftentimes a way intended to benefit us, to make sure that we actually have had the practice and the understanding to get the answer and move forward. What kind of lessons was Piety checking on to make sure that he got?
Talk about the man who was imagining the day of judgment, and that he wasn't ready.
Okay, good. What else?
He talked about simple, lazy, and arrogant.
Simple, lazy, and arrogant.
Yeah, it couldn't be bothered.
Right.
Another couple tried to enter the wrong way.
Right. And so we've got formality and hypocrisy who try to climb over the wall rather than take the path. Right.
To receive the term of glory.
So these little scenes and the recollections about what he encountered and what he remembered from them are all handled by Piety. Prudence steps in a second
Right.
and asks him different kinds of questions.
I want to comment on something because it just really blew me away.
Okay.
When he had talked before about coming to the top and wherever it was anyway, and seeing the cross and something else, anyway, and his burden dropped off.
Right.
I didn't see what we described.
Okay. All right. So what he said is, I no more travel a little further down the path. I'm on the bottom of 73. When I saw, as if it were in my mind, a man hanging on a tree bleeding, just the very sight of him made the burden fall off my back. And this is a great burden that I've been suffering for some time. When we actually read the passage, never mentioned a man bleeding.
Never mentioned the man on the tree.
Right.
No, and oh.
Right. Now, I don't completely understand why that is. I'm not. I'm as confused as you are.
You're not the writer.
What I will say though is, well, I had no more travel a little further down the path when I saw, as if it were in my mind, a man hanging on a tree bleeding. He sees the tree, and that's when the burdens fall off. We do remember that. That was explicit. I don't remember any mention of a man bleeding on that tree, but now as he's describing it, if you note, the terminology is not precisely what he saw. He talks about in my mind. So already he's connecting the tree with the cross and the cross with Christ. And I think that symbolism was all there from the beginning. But it is interesting that as he is relating it, that very evocative detail now comes up that didn't before. So whether that was something that Bunyan forgot that he mentioned and he wanted to make sure it was very explicit. But yeah, I noticed that too when I read it, like, I don't remember a bleeding man. Because we talked about that on last class, if you recall, because it harkened back to looking to the cross to find healing, just as the serpent was lifted up.
Yeah.
So yeah. But then, yeah, very, very, I caught that too. And that made me sort of stop for a minute. So these questions about what he saw, what it means, what do you remember? Did you see anything else? Those are all asked by piety. Prudence is going to come next and ask different questions. So let me go back to that again to say, why do you think piety, between piety, prudence, and charity, why is piety asking him what he saw? Like, do you see a role that the various virtues are asking specific types of questions? Well, generally speaking, how might we distinguish between piety, prudence, and charity? By meaning. Like, what's the difference between piety and prudence? What's prudence? Careful, thoughtful, wise. What's piety? Holy, righteous, religious, your right action. What's charity? Giving,
Love.
loving, sacrificial. So of those three, think again then, why is piety, your holiness, your righteousness, your right actions, why is piety asking him to describe all the things that he saw?
Maybe he feels that's the most important thing that you have for you is being holy.
Okay.
And therefore you are more apt to do these things.
Okay, good. Anything else?
I'm sure you've got a better one.
No, I'm just sort of thinking that, piety is so connected to our right actions.
Yeah.
That piety wants to make sure, as you said before, learned his lesson. That these are pious acts. These are acts, did you remember from these events how you can be faithful and righteous in the future? And because if you forgot about it, or you didn't see it, or you didn't understand it, how can you then be pious as you leave here without having learned those lessons first? A thought. Okay, so what does Prudence want to know?
Be careful.
You know, what does he remember about destruction? Why did he want to leave?
Okay. Yeah, there's some kind of pointed questions here about, do you sometimes think about the city of destruction? Do you think about your old life? Do you find yourself sometimes having thoughts about your old life, and they really become sort of strong? And so what are Christians' responses to all this?
That this thought entered his mind against his will.
Okay.
And she asked how he defeated them.
Okay, yeah. How, if you know that you're struggling, how do you defeat them? And what does he say?
He brings up what he saw at the cross.
Okay.
And he embroidered coat.
I look at the cross, I look at the garments I've been given by the king,
And the certificate.
and the certificate, the seal of my salvation. I think about where I'm going to the celestial city, and that always that does the trick.
Those things.
Well, why do you want to go there?
I want to see him alive.
Yeah, well, here's the guy in the tree who we didn't see before, but he must have. And I want to see him alive, and that I will be rid of all the things that still hold me back in some way. So we had this massive, debilitating burden relieved, but he is suggesting, I have struggles still, but in the celestial city, I won't. So what is he intending to say by that? What is the allegorical meaning?
Well, he's hoping for a better life.
Better life.
That people have been forgiven and get to the point where he wanted to be in the first place.
Right. This is an allegorical rendering of fellowship with Christ in the beatific vision. This is a heavenly vision of that place where there is no more sighing, no more sorrow, no more pain. That place where there is no more sin, there's no more trial, there's no more tribulation. That place where all of his sin has been wiped away, fully and completely in an eternal sense. He is, in essence, renewed and remade within the presence of God in a way that the struggles of life, whether they be internal or external, are completely behind him. Why is Prudence then, who we called caution, thoughtfulness, or wisdom, why is Prudence asking him about his struggles? And do you still have them? How do you deal with them? Why do you want to go to the celestial city? Why is that Prudence's area of interest?
Maybe wants to find out how clear things are with the sky.
Okay.
You know, is he just going along with it, or is he understanding as he goes along?
Okay, yeah. Understanding, I think, is an implicit part of prudence. To make a wise response is to understand the situation and then act rightly or choose rightly. So there's kind of an implicit, do you really know what you're doing? And are you really self-aware enough about how things are going? And I think there's kind of an element of thoughtfulness to that, or a caution. So if he was not self-aware of his continued struggles, then maybe that would be imprudent to continue without kind of taking stock, right? There is an element, both, Jesus telling us to consider the cost, but also maybe sometimes you just kind of need to know where you stand and what you're good at, what you're not good at, what the upcoming issues will be, and you need to kind of have a good reckoning in order to know how to be prepared for whatever comes next. If you've ever engaged in a diet or exercise plan, yeah, I'd like to get healthier, I'd like to lose weight, I'd like to feel different, whatever. One of the things that you're supposed to do is weigh yourself first. Why would you do that? If the goal is to lose weight, well, let's not think in the past, let's just go to the future.
Well, that's your starting point.
That's why.
You need to understand your starting point.
Yeah.
For a variety of reasons, but not the least of which is it kind of tells you what sort of work you ought to be doing. If you weigh yourself like, oh, you know what? I'm within 5 pounds of my target weight. Maybe you take things slow and easy. Oh, I'm 50 pounds off. This is going to be a much longer journey. Whatever it might be. Same thing with health. You might gauge yourself like, okay, I'm going to walk around the block and I'm going to see how I feel. And if you're huffing and puffing up after walking around the block once, well, you're not ready to start running 5Ks. That's clearly you're going to have to work up to it. But if you walk around the block once and no problem at all, okay, well then when I take my next step, I can kind of push it a little further. So perhaps prudence in this case wants him to understand, wants to make sure he understands what he's really dealing with.
Here's where you are.
Here's where you are.
And here's where you want to be.
Right. Yeah. How acquainted are you with yourself and what might prevent you from making it? These are very internal questions. So interestingly enough, prudence is not talking to him about, the dangers on the road that are coming up. Cautious, careful, wise. He's talking about the dangers inside of him.
Mm-hmm.
Are you, they might have warned you about lions, but let's just make sure for a second that you're actually up on the fact that you yourself will be, your biggest enemy. And so far, all the questions seem, well answered. And then Charity jumps in. What does Charity want to know?
She asked about family.
People. Are you married? Do you have children? Do you miss them? Why aren't they here? And this is.
Did you try hard?
Did you try hard enough?
Yeah.
So to me, this was kind of the hardest of the interactions. Like this one felt kind of sad to me.
Mm-hmm.
Why would Charity be asking questions about his family rather than prudence or, what else did we say? Piety.
Piety.
Why does Charity want to know about his family?
Where's your heart?
Okay, where's your heart? Excellent. Because if Charity is in essence love,
Charity deals with other people.
Charity deals with other people. That's right. Charity is the English rendering of caritas, the Latin, which itself is from the Greek agape or agape. That sort of, we might sing the song from the 70s about unconditional love, but it is divine love. It is sacrificial love. It is love for the other that is pure and holy. That this love can be broken down into lots of different pieces and lots of different directions, but ultimately it is reflecting the sort of love that God has for us. Like that's the pure definition of love. God looking at us in genuine agape, unfiltered, undiluted, 100% pure, then to whatever degree we can reflect that back to him or to one another, it, less than 100%, but that is charity. So in a contemporary sense, we tend to think of charity only as like giving money to people in need, right? But it is more properly understood as divine love. Now, could you explain divine love through giving something to somebody in need?
You wouldn't do it if you didn't have that love.
Sure. And we can, theologically put ourselves in the position of the needy person, of the beggar, of the homeless, of the hurting, of the helpless, and say that anything that God gives to us is charity because we haven't earned it, we don't deserve it. He sees us and cares for us, loves us, and gives us what we need in our lowly state. But it is more properly understood to be that broader definition of godly love. So in talking about love and talking about where your heart is, we get several follow-up questions about the family. So again, why do you think charity is so insistent? Again and again and again, we have like almost 2 pages worth of charity. Are you sure? What about this? Really about his family.
How about the adage, charity begins at home?
Oh, charity begins at home. Very good. What do you take that to mean? What do you take that adage to mean in general? And then how might it relate to this?
Well, if your heart is not in the right place, it's hard for you to imagine being charitable.
Okay.
You just don't see it.
To me, charity's last statement at the end of interviewing him kind of says it all. If your wife and children have been offended by this, meaning his behavior, then they show themselves unyielding for that which is good, and you have delivered your soul from accountability.
Yes. Right. So charity begins at home. Love must start with those who are closest to us. I'm always a little dubious of people who speak about their affections or their loves in very abstract terms. You ever heard the term that someone loves humanity, they just hate people? Yeah. You can be about a cause, about all of humanity in my heart, but they just don't. Yeah. They're not good around people. Like, I don't like you, and I wouldn't throw water on you if you're on fire. But my heart bleeds for the world. Well, charity begins at home in a sense that it's actually easier to love someone in the abstract. Because that love demands nothing of us. It's very easy to change your Facebook profile picture to support a cause. It's much more difficult to personally sacrifice something in regard to it. So charity must begin at home in the sense of, well, I need to love my family more than I need to love anybody else. Not so much, just in the sense of, if you can't love the people who are closest to you, how could you love anyone else? Your love would be very suspect because it's probably more imaginary than real. It's probably more of a mental picture than it is a practical action.
Let's go back to the Bible that said, if you can't love the people around you
who you have seen, how can you love God whom you have not seen? Right. And I definitely think that there is an element of that. So, and then, charity begins at home. ostensibly, these are like the most important people in your life. When we find out that people are estranged from immediate family members, don't we always have kind of a reflexive sense of, oh, what a shame. That's bad. You know, to say, oh, you know, I used to work with this guy and we haven't spoken in 10 years after I left the firm. You wouldn't think anything of it. Or I had a friend growing up, but then we sort of drifted apart, and I haven't even thought about so-and-so in 20 years. Isn't that interesting? And you just might think, okay, well, whatever. But when we hear about, you know, mothers and sons who don't talk, or we hear about a father and a daughter, or a marriage that splits up and they just kind of they wall each other off. Don't we have kind of a reflexive, that's not good?
Yes.
That these ought to be relationships that are maintained. And when it doesn't happen, we feel that sense of loss, even if it's just on behalf of someone else.
I think of one of my own family where the wife said she didn't have enough playtime. So she took, I think it's 6 months of a child and walked away from the marriage.
Oof.
And to this day, they speak to each other. They can be civil, but that's about it. Sad.
Yeah. You know, things happen, relationships break. That is an end result of the brokenness of our world, the brokenness within our own hearts. This is not to cast aspersions on people so much as it is to say, when we hear of these things, I think it reminds us of sad realities rather than just kind of a neutral sort of either way. You know, whether there's one person to blame, everybody to blame, it seems to me that when those intimate family relationships break down, you kind of can't ever think of it without a sense of, I wish it weren't so, one way or the other. And perhaps here's charity again. Does the master of the hill, the king of the celestial city, love Christian's family any less than he loves Christian? No. No. And so here's charity again. And I got to talk about this, not this past Sunday, but the Sunday before, I guess. Solicitude. There's a species of love in moral theology that says, I want God's best for you. To be solicitudinous is to want good things for you. It's to cheer you on from the sidelines when you do well. It's to be sorry with you when you hurt. It's to say, we're not in competition with each other for good things in life or for God's love, certainly. And the way that I feel blessed by God, I want you to feel that way too. And so charity, and part of, if charity is the overarching term, then solicitude is underneath it. That Christian's wife and children would be saved as well. You know, we want them on the road, just like Christian, but they're not. So the next thing that, you know, charity is kind of feeling around for with all these questions is, why are they not on the road with you? In a very specific sense. Why do you think that's worth knowing? Why is that worth asking?
I want to know how much more they have to do to get to step one.
Okay.
They're not in the same place in their journey.
Right. Right. And I think there's a check here, because it comes up, I think, pretty explicitly, and Christian has to respond to this. Are you at fault? Are you the reason they're not here? Is it possible that he could have been the reason they weren't there? I mean, not, I'm saying in the context of this story, but I'm saying in a general sense. Have you ever, can you conceive of a situation where someone, through their actions or their life, turns others away from Christ?
Yeah.
I think for sure. For sure.
He asked if anything, was he too strict and denied himself things for their sake?
Yeah. Right. Like I was actually maybe too indulgent rather than I was mean-spirited towards them. You know, were you the sort of parent, like for you to be here and them to be there? That's, you need to explain yourself. There's got to be a good reason why. So this is not a part of the recorded conversation, but earlier on, I was telling everybody about Timmy wrestling in Michigan with his coach, and he got hurt and had to go to the hospital, and I had to receive phone calls. Well, in Kalamazoo, Michigan, in the Bronson Methodist Hospital ER, here's a 16-year-old from the state of Florida and no parents, and he's injured and bleeding. That's worth noting. So I get calls all night long from one person after the other because they want to speak to his parent or guardian and get permission for stuff. So there could be a reason why a 16-year-old is 1,000 miles away and injured without a parent to give personal consent for their treatment, but they need to know, right?
Yeah.
It only makes sense that we find out why.
The school or coach have written consent.
It doesn't matter. They do, but it doesn't matter in the
Yeah.
sense of when somebody actually shows up in an ER, you're not just going to look at a piece of
No.
paper. You're gonna, they feel the need to follow up as best as possible. Now, could they have given him a false phone number and they thought they were speaking to the parent, but they were, yeah, sure. You know, I don't know how you could really 100% tell, but it wasn't enough for them to just see a piece of paper. They wanted that next step. So I think if piety wants to know if he has learned sufficient lessons to make to make right choices further up the path, and prudence wants to make sure he understands himself well enough and where his own weaknesses and temptations are, charity wants to check his heart and to make sure that he hasn't gotten this backwards and become, in essence, so self-centered that his quest for God has actually hurt his own family.
You're more important than
Yeah, I'm more important than you are. You know, let's make sure that's not what happened. My holiness is the most important thing. Or you wretched refuse who are holding me back. You know, you're not as holy as I am, who knows better, whatever it might be. We have all encountered people who have said or done something in a Christian-y or churchy fashion that was sort of unpleasant or even repulsive. We have perhaps inadvertently or on purpose done something we thought was right that really turned somebody else off. And so charity, I think, wants to ensure that his heart and his affections really are pure. You did try your best by them, but then under their responsibility, they chose no. Otherwise, it would be better if a millstone were tied around your neck. That's those who cause the little ones to go astray. There's judgment and there's responsibility. So this is a significant thing. And it seems that all of his answers are very appropriate, and all of his answers I tried my best, and all of his answers kind of lay out what he tried and what they rejected. And ultimately, he is not culpable. He is not responsible for their choice to refuse. Again, let me do my regular Lewis recounting. Two types of people in this world: those who say, "Thy will be done," and those who say, "My will be done." The former will be known as God's children, the latter will be known as his tools. But in essence, God does not force his presence upon anyone.
Of course, you kind of talk pretty loud sometimes.
True enough. But again, if the door of hell is locked from the inside, it is a choice to reject. It is a choice to remain. It is a choice to refuse. And the true love is to honor that choice, whatever it might be. All right, what else? We had one thing that we didn't bring up, and I'm trying to find it. I think I'm looking in the right section. I just don't know if my eyes zipped past it or if I'm misremembering and it was somewhere else. Yep, here it is. Here it is. We have to go back to talking to the watchman, because the watchman also wants to know where you're from, if you recall that. What's your name? My name is Christian in the middle of page 70. But it used to be something else. What was his name before it became Christian? Graceless.
Yeah.
My name was Graceless. And so anyway, we'd speculated before that he was always described very generically until a particular moment in the story where his name became Christian. And so now we can go back and we can see that before that, he did have a name, but it was Graceless.
Okay, I didn't look that one up. What is the reference? I was of the family of Japheth, whom God will persuade to dwell in the tents of Shem.
Yeah,
What's that from?
Shem, Ham, and Japheth, that's one of Noah's sons.
Well, let's see.
Don't remember.
The 9:27 states, may God extend Japheth's territory, may Japheth live in the tents of Shem, and may Canaan be the slave of Japheth. And so this is one son gets himself in trouble. The other two sons, including Japheth, are then praised by Moses and blessed. So he's basically saying, I'm a child of the promise, but this is a promise that it'll be a long time in coming. So my eyes almost skipped past it, and I wanted to bring that back up because I thought that was an interesting little addition that we hadn't seen before. Anything else? Okay, so we're ready for 5 next week? Okay, all right, well, let's do chapter 5 next week, and we will continue moving on.